Setting goals is the smaller part of the job. The bigger job is managing them. Most people don't take enough time to really still their minds and really think about, okay, what do you really want? What do you want people to write on your gravestone, your epitaph one day? What would you like that to be?
This is Humble Mind. We are a social learning community of curious professionals who share a common passion for conversation and connections that matter, as well as a little bit of time for learning about the future. If you're listening to this podcast or watching it, you're missing out. Humble Mind community members get access to join our podcast recordings live, get access to early releases of new clips on our platform, our newsletter, access to group sessions, courses, workshops, replays from previous sessions. It's all good stuff. So go and check it out at join.humblemind.co for more. What's in the mental and psychological toolkit of great performers? Whether it's in business or art or sport, there seems to be some kind of recipe or mindset of sorts, more often than not, that delivers results and achieves a certain level of impact. So what's in that mindset, and what can a basic understanding of psychology do to help us to possibly unlock that for ourselves? Even if you don't necessarily want to become the next Elon Musk, what can we learn from not just great minds, but great mindsets, and how they can inspire not just good ideas, but real action? Well, today, to explore that, we're going to be talking to Dr. David Goncalves, who is a practicing clinical psychologist, author, speaker, and also an impressive endurance athlete, which we'll talk about today. So, Dr. David, welcome.
Hi, Alex. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Yeah, great to have you here. So maybe let's jump into that. You are an endurance athlete of sorts, and you've also run the Cape Town Marathon a couple of days ago, right? How did you do?
Yes.
By the way.
I did okay. I had a goal because I've run that same marathon a couple of years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and I just missed the 3 hour mark by a minute. I ran 3 hours and 1 minute. Marathon running, getting in under 3 hours is kind of a thing. And I ran I ran it on Sunday, and guess what my time was? 3 hours and 1 minute once again. So it seems to be
Wow.
my thing. Yeah.
Well, consistency is king. So, yeah, well done. How did you? What other kind of events, or what other kinds of sort of running, or I don't know actually how you call it, athleting? How do you call it? I mean, would you call yourself an athlete, or are you more?
So I guess I'm kind of a fan of endurance, Alex,
Okay.
and that's how it kind of happened. Here in South Africa, where I grew up, one of the most famous events we have is a run, which is in sort of in international terms, it's a double marathon plus 5 kilometers. It's called the Comrades Marathon, and basically it's an 89-kilometer running race. And I kind of grew up watching that on TV, and it's become quite an iconic event. It's been run for over 100 years along the same route. And so that's how I kind of fell into it. So, yeah, I guess endurance sort of took to me, or I took to it from watching that. And so I did my first Comrades Marathon when I was 25, I think, or 20, yeah, somewhere there, 23, actually, 23, 24. And I ended up in ICU with kidney failure. So it was pretty hectic. I didn't drink enough water, and I was going too fast, and I wasn't planning my race. So there's all sorts of lessons to be learned from that. And then from there, I got into mountain biking and different endurance events. And because I don't have very good coordination, so I couldn't do ball sports very well. So I had to pick something that I could do.
Wow. Well, you certainly did it and are doing. That's incredible. Do you find that there's like a link between, the mindset of a psychology of someone who's able to push themselves beyond, what seems like the physical barrier for many people, because with endurance, even the word endurance, it means that you got to kind of, stick it out longer than you might like. Is there a connection there between that and, let's say, what might characterize good or endurance performance in business or in another sphere?
I really think there is, Alex. I'm often reminded, my father was an illegal immigrant actually, and he came from a very poor place. And, when we used to go visit our family there, the first time I saw a pit latrine, which is basically a toilet dug in the bush with a deep hole underneath. And so he came from that and ended up doing very well in business, even though he couldn't read or write, but he could think. And a lot of and I was sort of very observant of that. And it kind of got me interested, being a psychologist, in what are those difference makers and what are the difference makers in endurance sports. And there's a lot of crossover, especially, around you got to have this weird mixture of patience and impatience. Patience to keep chipping away at something that looks like it's not moving, but not stopping. And impatience in the sense that you kind of have this like, I want this to work and I want this to work badly. And in endurance sports, you see that. And I often see that. So I love talking to successful business people about, how they did that, because the common denominator, as you will have observed so many times, is not necessarily level of education or the exposure they had to other successful business people. All of that stuff can count to some other degree, but it has more to do with those things that we also see in endurance sports, and what makes endurance sports people do what they do successfully.
So yeah, so it's, I suppose, in the sporting kind of example we're exploring here, it's definitely less about strength, or the physical attributes that can, make you faster, better, quicker, stronger, but rather something that's mental. I suppose that's kind of generally understood, and there's lots of stories and examples about people who are able to push through because of the fortitude that they have in some way. But yeah, that's interesting. Just hearing you talk about it in that way.
Yeah, yeah, it is. There's so much. I've often said this when I speak to people in groups or whatever. It's not always necessarily the strongest athlete who will win a race, or necessarily the one who has all the right numbers. Of course, those things count. I mean, there's no doubt. But over and above that, especially with endurance sports, but even something we saw in the Olympics this year with the 100 meters and the 200 meters. I don't know if you followed that, but it was amazing how some of the people who were absolutely guaranteed and expected to win didn't, and perhaps attitude had something to do with that.
For sure, yeah. So I want to come back to, I suppose, what we're talking about now, which is mindset and the recipe or the ingredients that go in that. Even though it seems like there's a lot of commonalities, between different mindsets of success, but also there's probably quite a lot of variance and sometimes maybe bits of luck that get in there too. And we can get into that. But I want to kind of just get a basic definition, or maybe quick understanding, if you like, on your perspective as a psychologist, and looking at modern psychology, let's say over the last 50 years. We've had a couple of people on the podcast over the last couple of months talk to us quite a bit about archetypes and archetypal kind of theory. That's all based with, in the work by Carl Jung and many others. So I'd like to maybe just get your almost like your worldview on psychology. Where do you kind of approach the conversation when it comes to not just in your clinical practice necessarily, but on how, where does psychological analysis or the psychological thinking fit when it comes to looking at the modern experience of people? Is there a particular view you have or an angle that you take when it comes to thinking about this?
Yeah, there definitely is, Alex. I try to, I like to keep things simple. Maybe I'm just like a simple guy. I never forget my roots. I mean, we're all just human beings. We're all just simple people trying to get by and make a difference. And that's when we feel great, to put it really, really loosely. So for me, the world of psychology has, first of all, been very interesting, right? Because before, Sigmund Freud came along and all of that kind of stuff, psychological issues were sort of associated with, curses and illnesses and who knows what, kind of the supernatural. And then came Jung and he started to, Jung, Freud, and then and so many who came after him, Carl Jung. who then sort of developed it into all of these branches. And I think in the modern age, we're branching off again, because when I did my master's degree in like 2000 and 2001, somewhere there, psychology was very much of the position of we're a blank slate, and we go gently with people. We leave ourselves out of the session, and we allow the client to express, and etc. And today, if you look around, the world of coaching has so much has grown like crazy, and social media has changed a lot, and I think the world has changed in the sense that people. I find that I'm seeing people for shorter periods, and they want a result, which I can respect. Because I want a result. You want to see that there's change. That people ring you and they make an appointment because there's something they want to move or change over here. So my view very much has become simplified, in the sense that, if I'm sitting in front of somebody, I want to know why they make an appointment and what are they looking for, and helping them get clarity on that, and how to get there. So yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes I refer to performance psychology. I do a little, bit of things in sport as well. But performance relates to many things. We're all aware of our performance, whether we're in academics or whether we're in the business world or whether we're in the sports world, or how I'm performing as a father or a husband. And ultimately, I find people are in their best psychological state when they feel like they're performing in the arenas, performing adequately in the arenas which are important to them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Do you find that there's some work to do then with people to kind of define what those arenas are first?
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have, hit the nail more on the head. What I'm finding is that so many people are just getting by, and they're just kind of doing the minimum. Let me just get to the end of the month, and look forward to the weekend, and so we haven't spent enough time really thinking about what is important to us, to me as an individual. And I find, unless you have that step figured out, what you should do, how to get away from perhaps, where you're not happy being, whether that's emotionally, physically, in your relationships and all of those. It's very difficult to figure out. It's kind of like jumping in your car and then heading out onto the road, but you've not decided where you're going. So you have a car and you can move and you've got the ability to drive, but you don't have a clear destination. I mean, where are you going to go? And I think very, very often I find even people who have the outside trappings of conventional success, inside, many people are living with a feeling of hollow darkness. And it really often comes down to not knowing what they really want and not actually understanding that's a thing, and following it is a thing, and just being on the road towards that is already enlightening.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who might kind of come back at you with, and maybe you've heard this in sessions before over the years, I'm sure you have in some way, but someone who might say to you, well, actually, my darkness is my fuel, and the things that I'm, maybe running away from actually power me and make, that's how I get things done. And that's how I kind of can sort of muscle my way in through my to-do list and build a great company and earn lots of money. And look at my house, look at my car, look at all the things I got, And if you sort of like take away my fear in some way, who am I going to be without it? Just something I've heard a little bit about.
Yeah, your darkness can absolutely fuel you, and there are examples of people who've done amazing things like that. People who, in working away from. So what you'll often find is some people who grew up in abject poverty, who just decided, like, I hate that. I don't ever want to be ever, for example, not having financial resources to make the decisions I'd like to make. And that burn, that fire is what drives them towards, success. Often that darkness can fuel you. It's almost like a rocket taking off from a launch pad. You got to get it off the pad. So that kind of darkness can often be very productive because it gets them going. And if they didn't get going, there was no way they were going to change anything. My feeling often, my sense with people in sitting in front of them, these last 23 odd years, is that it's not enough in the long term. There comes a time where, people who are just driven by that. I'll give an example. I won't mention any names, but I know a man who built very, very significant wealth from South Africa, ended up, owning several properties in London, and did an amazing amount of wealth generation against all the odds without any advantages, and really has got an admirable business history. Personally, though, he's quite compromised. He's consistently irritable. Whenever I see him, he's irritated. And what it is, and I see that quite often, is it's great that that darkness drives you, and it's amazing how hard it can drive people. But sometimes we're not thinking about and then what? What about when you do come out of wealth? Wealth in itself is never a great objective. Wealth is just, money helps you do stuff. You just have to figure out the next step is, what is the stuff you want to do with your money? But having money, being buried in a coffin full of $100 bills, is not, very fulfilling. Money, notes smell bad. They've been touched by a million people. Money is just a means. And if you don't figure out what the next step is, so you've made all this money, that's great. What are you going to do with your money? What are the things that really, inspire you, that you would do for free, or that really give you a different kind of a kick? And so, yes, you're right. It often does drive people. It sets them off. It'll power them out of some very abject circumstances. And certainly there's no question that they needed that. Otherwise, they would never have gotten out of that. But unless they take, at some point down the road, and then what principle. Okay, so now you've got money, then what? And more and more and more, that's fine. Then what? And when they don't have that, I do find people sometimes who are elderly and excessively successful can become lonely, can become jaded, and unless they've figured out that, and then what?
Mm, mm. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, finding that balance, and so I'm interested to hear more about, what are some of the other similar traits or observations you found, in coaching or coming into contact with, whether it might be successful people, other executives or leaders who, you've spoken with. Perhaps you've gotten to know them quite well, understood their background, what's fueled their trajectory as well. What have you found are some things? They can be positive or negative, but some of the similarities behind what is kind of behind this mindset, what's behind this psychology of being able to just go out and do things, and maybe even great things.
Yeah, I love that question, Alex, because it keeps me quite busy in my mind. Because what you'll find is, so people who I've seen be very successful and so on, they come from very varied backgrounds, right? So you'll get people who come from, I know one gentleman who ran a massive company here, and he was kind of born into it. His father started the business and grew it really big without him. Dad retired, he took over, and he drove it even bigger. I mean, it's an amazing story of what he's done. So there's somebody who didn't really have much adversity, as far as he could tell and remember, and shared with me. His parents were very supportive. He'd not been through any trauma. So, there are sometimes this idea that you have to come from adversity, or you've got to come from this really rags to riches story. And, that man is an example of that, and then I'm always aware of, you kind of grow up in your own context, and then you start to learn the rest of the world, which is the path that so many of us come along. My own dad, I mentioned to you, could never read or write. He stopped attending school when he was 10 because on this little island where he lived, that's what the poor kids did. You got them out of school as soon as they could count because then they could run errands for you and do things. My grandfather, his father was a violent alcoholic. My grandmother was blind. And so my dad would watch his drunk father beat on his blind mother. It was like horrible. We used to go
Wow.
visit there sometimes and when we were kids and that's where they had a pitler tree and there were 7 kids. They had a 2-room house. The house literally had 2 rooms, one here, and the kitchen was outside, the sort of fireplace things. It was real poverty. And that was in Europe, by the way. But obviously in the 1940s and 50s, and even when I was there, like in the 70s, it had changed. It's not like that today. But my point is, so you have these 2 people who then, became very successful. My father retired at the age of 52 and kind of did whatever he wanted until he passed away at 77. And so what those 2 people have in common, right? So we can talk about what was so different. One comes from a very supportive and well-educated family. The other one came from, what I've just described. But really, I think one of the keys is desire. And
Mm.
I know that sounds like such a simplified answer, but having desire and being able to hold on to your desire and to remember your desire. Everybody has desire, right? If you show somebody who lives in poverty and you show them wealth and you say, "Would you like that?" Of course they say, "Yes, of course I'd like that." But they begin to believe that it's not for them. And that is one of the biggest differences. It reminds me of an experiment that was done. You may have heard of this. There's this fish called the Great Northern Pike. It's a North American freshwater fish. And did you ever hear the story of the pike?
No,
So
no.
the pike hunts minnows, which is these little fish. Now, forgive me if I'm getting the fish names wrong, but it's something like this, right? So the pike is this hunter fish, and he's a real go-getter. It's a real, he's a predator, and he hunts these minnows. The minnows are little; they don't have a chance. So they put this pike. This is a true story, but it was done long ago because today I think, you know, people would have been enraged. But they put this pike in a tank and they put a couple of minnows in there, and this pike just goes at these minnows, and they don't have a chance. Eventually, what they did was they waited, until the pike got a little bit hungry again, and then they put this big glass pane inside the tank in front of the pike, and they put minnows on the other side. And he kept going for these minnows, but every time he went, he'd smash his nose against this glass in the tank, right? So every time he sees a pike, he goes for it and goes for it. And eventually he just stopped because his nose was bruised and he was in pain. And towards the end of the experiment, what the experimenters did is they took out the glass between the pike and the minnows. And so the minnows came and swam past the pike. And the pike actually starved to death with minnows swimming around his mouth. So what had happened was,
Wow.
and this happens with us all in some way or another, is from continued failure, the pike began to believe that it just wasn't going to happen. And when opportunities presented themselves, the pike didn't go for the minnows and he starved to death with these things swimming right past his jawline. And that happens to people so many times. Like, this gentleman who inherited this business from his father and grew it so much bigger and ran it really well, he had desire, but he needed to believe that he could do that, and that it would be worth doing. And that when the challenges did come, because we all bump our noses sometimes, so when challenges come, is you got to have that persistence, but we don't persist when we don't believe something is possible. My own dad, I would often say, like, you got to take action. That's all he ever said is action, action, get going, move. And there are many people in his village who grew up like he did, who still live like that today, who live in these little homes and don't, and so they all had the same opportunities, but somehow nothing. I'm not taking any credit here; it had nothing to do with me. But he never lost that desire and belief. He was so funny. We used to laugh at him because he had this accent and he just thought he could do anything. And that was a part of his success. And he just thought he could do absolutely anything.
Wow. Do you think then that so much of this hinges on the quality or the direction of the story we tell ourselves? And I suppose my real question is, can working, let's say with a coach or a psychologist or some kind of specialist, maybe even just a friend who will listen, is it about, changing the story that I think for myself, the things I think I need, what I deserve as well, the money I deserve to earn, the way that my talent should be received around the world? I need to change the story I tell myself, or is it about going out and kind of creating a new reality and then that helps to change the story? Or does it start with that story first? I mean, maybe it's different for everybody, but I suppose I'm just curious in the story elements of it.
So I love that. When I was studying, we would often talk about the narratives,
Mm.
which is to do with stories. And, stories are narrated. And so I guess your question is, does it start with a coach who can kind of, point these things out, or is it this that someone goes out and you're right. I do think it starts, differently for different people. Your question reminds me, I have a good friend who lives just, I can almost see his house from where I'm sitting now. And he won't mind me telling you the story. His name is Mark. And Mark built a very, very successful cabinetry business, right? So they make all sorts of things. He has a factory and they make kitchens and cupboards and huge, huge projects all over the show. And he was working himself, almost to death. He had many, many employees and, the conventional things around that. And life became a drag. Yes, he had amassed wealth and was certainly a lot more successful outwardly than anybody believed. But by his own admission, he was hard to live with. He was always irritable, and there were the odd occasion when just the stress was crazy. One customer doesn't pay you, and then you can't pay your, huge number of employees. And so he was kind of living that stressed out life. And he has a friend. This is not a coach. It wasn't me. And it's just a friend who he knew before we knew each other. And this friend said to him, kind of made him think about why you're doing all this. So you've got this factory, and the factory's growing, and the jobs are huge, and the projects are profitable. But Mark was just one of those guys who was making good money, conventionally successful, but wasn't loving his life. And his friend challenged him to watch a movie every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Like, go off to the cinema. Doesn't matter what's happening in the factory, who hasn't paid you, which machine is broken, which employees have done whatever they've done. Go and watch a movie on your own. So kids are at school. Mark would go and watch a movie. And he said he felt like an absolute idiot sitting there, like, well, my mate said I should do this. And it was the beginning of a journey for Mark. And today we often tease him because it looks like he's not working, but he is. And he still has stress, but he's learned the art of compartmentalizing. So when he's at the factory, he's factory Mark, and he's working and he's making sure all the deliverables are being delivered. But he's learned to compartmentalize, to let go the things he can do nothing about. And whether you sit at home or sit in traffic and develop a stomach ulcer about them or not, actually doesn't make a difference to those things. So in his case, it was a friend. It wasn't even, I mean, I've met that friend, right? He's a hooligan, but he was exactly what Mark needed
Right.
at that time. And it was probably the best advice that he could have been given, because the 10 o'clock movie on a Tuesday became, oh, well, if I can do that, I can make a bit of time for my wife. If I can do that, I can nip off a bit of time and go watch my little boy play sport or whatever it was. And it started to open his brain. So he had it from a friend, like that. And I would stick my neck out and say, I would say in the most cases it happens that way around. I mean, certainly there are exceptions, but I would say, in most cases it comes from an exposure of sorts, where it very rarely comes from the inside. It comes from exposure to something, and it comes from asking yourself questions. And that sometimes is the value of a coach or of a psychologist or someone who just, most of the people I see are financially more successful than I am. So I'm not going to jump in there and say, right, let me tell you how to run the business, Bob. I just like really listen to the narrative
Mm,
and I ask questions. I often refer to it as I kick the tires, man. I don't make the car. I'm just checking why you made this decision, why you made that decision, what was your thinking behind this. And all we're doing is we're tucking in the loose ends, we're knocking out the bubbles and getting things perhaps to more of what they are not necessarily always aware, but where they'd really like to be going.
mm. Yeah. Your points about the compartmentalizing is also well made. I remember watching a clip a few days ago from Simon Sinek, who
Mm.
was saying that, a real kind of mental epidemic that we have in our culture, especially I think amongst younger people, certainly millennials, as we all know, Simon's no friend of the millennials. But
Yes.
what he was saying was that we're kind of blurring the lines more and more between our personal identity and our work identity. And so what happens is when we're fired, or when we start a new job, or when we're in a moment of crisis or transition, which is normal, obviously, as life happens, there's so many twists and turns, then there's that additional kind of personal identity crisis that gets sort of put on top of that as well, because for all this time, the last 10 years, I've been defining myself as a marketing director, or I've been defining myself as a nurse helping people. And now that I don't have that for some reason, or that might have felt like it was taken away from me, I don't know who I am.
Mm. Gee, so often I had like a similar discussion to this with some colleagues, actually, a lady who's a psychologist in Cape Town, and we were talking about boundarylessness, and it kind of relates. Um, how this came into discussion was we were talking about the advent of the pandemic and that, and so there was so much work from home stuff. So what a lot of employees found, for example, was that they now had the office at home. So their managers or superiors or direct reports, whatever you want to call them, would previously have called the office. And if they weren't in the office, well, you got to wait for tomorrow when he or she's back in the office. Now they're like, well, it's at your desk at home. I know you're having dinner with your family, but when you're done there, won't you just, send me this mail or
It'll
whatever?
just
So
take
the
5 minutes.
boundaries
Yeah.
fell away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this interesting balance because ideally you'd like to be fluid and open and just feel like you're not sort of living in these boxes, but at the same time there is a certain value to boundaries, and having certain boundaries. It's something we talk a lot about in psychology. Even in relationships there need to be some boundaries. There's a reason there are two people in the relationship. It's because they're not identical. If they were identical, one would probably be unnecessary. So
Yeah.
there are boundaries, there are differences that are productive, and compartmentalizing is a thing that I think has to be understood correctly, because even myself, people often joke with my wife and say, wow, your husband does a lot in relationships and that, what's he like to live with? This was actually somebody who was teasing her yesterday.
It's a good
And
question.
and I said, I mean, I do this for a living, but I'm just a normal guy like any other guy with the same challenges that any other person has. I just have certain passions and things. And so when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. I've got three teenage sons. And we just do dad and son, sometimes dumb stuff. I'm not psychoanalyzing or doing all of those kinds of things. So that those are compartments that are important, because my children most often don't need me to be a psychologist. They need me to be me.
Mm,
They need me to be dad.
mm, mm. I've found this with my own kids actually. When I want to engage them in something, especially my son, who's the oldest, he's 8.5, and I want to.
Ah,
I've got a big passion for music, and I want so badly for him to take that up as well. And he is. I've seen him. He's got a really musical ear. I've seen him kind of tinker away at it in his own way. But I found that as soon as I push or become the music teacher, instead of dad, maybe it's his character, maybe it's something within me, but he turns off. The receptiveness just He doesn't want to do it. He's
Wow.
bored already, and he's like, no, let's do something else. Let's play Lego. Let's go outside. Let's go fight. Let's do something else. But as soon as I kind of like appear to him in some way as like instructive or in some way, which I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to still be fun, but I also want to like, look, if you're interested in this, I can teach you. I can teach you some things. But as soon as I go there, then that kind of just shrivels away. And yeah, it's a funny one.
That's so interesting, isn't it? It often reminds me of the paradox of parenthood because, um, and forgive me, I'm not an expert on the Bible, but somewhere there it says that a prophet is without honor in his own land. Sometimes all you need is for him to fall in love with music through somebody else. And sometimes just because it's you, just because it's me. So I'll often, with endurance sports, I'll say to my kids, "Hey, come on, I mean, one day we can do these things together." And I find that, sometimes my message is valuable when it comes from someone else. It's the same concept, really. We've all heard the saying of that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
When so I have some friends that I really respect, and I speak of them in their absence in very respectful ways in front of my kids. We talk in front of our kids all the time about everything. And I know that when dad's useless, when you're a teenager, you become so clever. And so your dad knows nothing. If I want my kids to know something, I got to get one of my friends who I respect to tell them. And then they'll believe it.
Yeah.
But if it's me, prophet is without honor in his own land. You got to preach it to someone else, brother, because your homeland is not going to take the message. Yeah,
I'm
it's
gonna copy that.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just need to buck up and get a music teacher rather than me trying to do it myself. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Um, Kind of just going back to some of these habits and some of the ingredients of the mindset of people who can kind of achieve things. Not only, I mean, life is not only about achievement, as you've said, it's also about the foresight to know what you want and understanding
Yeah.
the root of those desires and where you want to go with those desires. So much of that is also about being able to manage your own goals in a smart way. I'd love to hear if you've got any insight on goals, setting them, managing them. I read on your website that some of the work you've done is with people who set weight loss goals for themselves. And that's a goal. That's a clear goal. I'm looking, to lose weight. I'm looking to start a business. I'm looking to, fix my car, whatever the case may be. Is there a smart way of navigating goals so that you can achieve them, but also that you can give yourself an orientation to understand that these are the right goals for me to go after, right? Because that's also almost like a second layer.
Yes, there's an absolute science to it. And, John Maxwell has written so much on leadership and many different things. He's written so many books. He'll often talk about, and I saw him say this live, and he's got such a way of saying this, as he said, setting goals is the smaller part of the job. The bigger job is managing them, managing the things you set out to do, because you can sit most people down, and if you kind of force it out of them, they'll dare and maybe stick their neck out and admit to some goals, especially if you can kind of skillfully be non-threatening and make it comfortable for them to express anything. But it's managing those that's important. So, I mean, certainly there is a science around it. People, the way I often find people go, well, I don't know, I'm doing this. Maybe they have, like, they're a marketing exec, say, right? And, I'm paying the bills and I can't not do this because this is how I educate my children, feed my family, X, Y, and Z. But I'm unhappy. I feel like I'm just, and what that often is they kind of, and I used to have this talk that I used to give called tumbleweeds, where most people just are like a tumbleweed. The wind blows them this way and they kind of go this way, then the wind blows them that way and they kind of go that way. And where do most tumbleweeds end up? Most tumbleweeds end up in a ditch because that's where the wind stops blowing them. And so a ditch is like where I'm not happy, I'm not fulfilled. And I really have a heart for people like that. I mean, I spent a considerable part of my career working in obesity. I still do, except I do, more other things now. But, and I worked with a surgeon, I worked with some specialists around obesity surgery, even where it was in extreme cases. And then I do a lot of work where it's not surgery based. And it's the same thing. Goal setting is crucial, but there is a bit of a science behind it. Most people don't take enough time to really still their minds, and really think about, okay, what do you really want? Like so what I used to say to people is, what do you want people to write on your gravestone, your epitaph one day? What would you like that to be? And we begin from there and we come back, and what does that mean? So, for example, with weight loss, even everybody knows what they should weigh. You go on to, Google, and you can type in your height and your weight, and it'll spit out that your body mass index should be, between 19 and 25, and it'll give you a number.
Mm.
Numbers are not what get people going. What gets people going, so what I always used to do with those people is I would have a session, I still do this, I have a session called a bucket list session. And I say, okay, you want to lose weight, that's great. Of course, your health and your doctor said and whatever, and your fat pants and all of the jokes you make. But in essence, so many of those people wanted to get away from the embarrassment they felt walking down the aisle in an aircraft, looking at people's faces with an empty seat next to them, looking at them going, I hope you're not sitting next to me, buddy.
Mm.
That kind of stuff, or being able to tie your shoelaces and breathe at the same time. So often those things, those little goals, which tie into bigger goals, are what get, the broader thing going.
Mm.
So people don't think enough about goals. People are mostly tumbleweeding around. And so there is a science to goal setting, short term, medium term, long term. We kind of break them down a little bit, but goals are almost like, those Russian dolls that fit into each other.
Yeah.
And you got to keep taking them apart. And then, so we start like down here, what's the little one to do? And then, the next one, the next one, the next one. And they're not just random stuff plucked out of the air. They actually mold around each other, or dovetail, as some people refer to it. And that's what, we have to look at. And sadly, so many people, as the saying goes, live lives of quiet desperation. So there's silence and desperation. I'm not talking about it, but it's burning me inside. And that's really what I have a passion for, is getting people out of, quiet desperation.
Yeah, it's a great line, Roger Waters. I think it sounds like you're saying then that a great way of managing goals and giving yourself a better way to achieve them is to think through them, or give yourself the time to be able to, like you said, still your mind, think through them a little bit more deeply, make sure that they can align with, okay, is this what I really, really want? And
Yeah.
then perhaps after that thinking, is about maybe reducing the size of the goal. Because this is kind of what I've just been picking up from what you were saying, which makes sense to me, because I think often when we set a goal, I do this all the time, is that I'll think about it. Oh, that's a good idea. And then, yes, let's do it. And you kind of look back 2 or 3 days later and shit, that's wow. Okay. I'm really kind of biting off a lot there. Maybe if I start off, let's just do, part 1 first. I'll get to the other 20 parts, So is that about making the whole project more realistic, or is it about incentivizing myself by the fact that I can pick up these small wins along the way?
It's exactly what you said, picking up the small wins. I mentioned to you that the Comrades Marathon, which is this like 89-kilometer run in South Africa. So the first one, I went off and did this thing, and I trained a lot, but I just kind of was training wildly, and I was young and clueless. And so I ran this thing, ended up having kidney failure, hence being in ICU for a week after that. And then, it kind of became like, so my goal was to run it under a certain time, right, in 7.5 hours. Now they give you 12 hours to do this thing in. I thought, I want to do it. It's a different medal you get if you do it under certain times, etc. So a silver medal is under 7.5 hours. So I'd had this idea of doing that. And, the whole hospital experience and kidney failure and ICU can be pretty daunting. And I thought, can I do it? Then I thought, oh, maybe not. And what somebody showed me years later. So at 20, I think I was 24 when I did that. I got myself into ICU and missed the goal by more than an hour. I actually got it done when I turned 41. And the difference was that there were some people who'd done it multiple times, and they just said to me, "Look," because whenever I thought about doing it, it just was too. I couldn't fit my head around that goal. And I'd met a bunch of people who'd done it a bunch of times, and they said, "Look, if you just see if you can learn to run a 10K in under 39 minutes or something like that." And I was pretty close to that, so I thought, "Well, I can do that, you know." And then it was like, "Okay, well, see if you can run a half marathon in under 85 minutes." And I was pretty close to that. So what happened was every time I'd achieved one of those, the next one seemed more possible.
Mm.
But if you'd asked me, are you going to run a silver at Comrades? I would have thought like, I don't know, last time I tried, I ended up in hospital in ICU, and some of the doctors had told me you'll never be able to run more than 8 kilometers again.
Mm.
What's the one guy told me. And that's pretty devastating, when your goal is to do this thing that's more than 10 times that. And ultimately I did it at 41, and maybe I was more mature, but all I did was I just put enough together. I put enough of the smaller goals together that were in line that the larger goal happened. I can tell you the day that I did that and I beat it, I ran 7 hours and 16 minutes. I beat it by 15 minutes. And it wasn't, wasn't easy and any of
Mm.
those things, but there is this sense of I call it personal momentum. You know how momentum, you kind of have this like, okay, we've got momentum here. When you achieve little goals, you need that momentum to fuel you to the next goal. And you need that momentum to fuel you to the next goal. And what I find often with dealing with people, especially high performers, whether that's sort of in the business world or even in the sports world, is that they poo-poo the small stuff. you
Mm.
know they laugh at like, oh, that's it's a small thing, I can do that so easily. Yeah, well then do it, and then pick the next thing that's slightly harder. My late dad we used to laugh at him because wherever we were, if there was 1 cent, now 1 South African cent is not worth bending over for, but if there's 1 cent in the dust, he would pick it up and put it in his pocket, and I'd say to him, what are you doing? I mean, it's a cent, what are you going to do with that? He always said, well, if I have 99 cents, it makes it a whole rand. And anyone who's built significant success, they develop a little bit of a sense of fussing over the small stuff. People who only have these way out goals and it's way out there, but they're not, obsessing to some degree or being aware of the little things. Tend to be those people who always have these way out dreams and
Yeah.
these beautiful stories to tell, but you need that personal momentum of achieving the little things to push you to the next goal.
Yeah, it's about getting the basics right. One of my kind of like little silly things that I do when I get a bit of spare time, especially at the end of the night, once I put my kids to bed and I'm on YouTube or I'm just on my phone or something, is I watch cooking videos. Not that I'm a great
Uh,
cook or chef at all, but specifically of Marco Pierre White, who's an amazing celebrity chef. And it's so interesting to see what he does nowadays, because he's obviously a master. He was, I think, the first British chef to win 3 stars at Michelin.
wow.
But now he just focuses on unbelievably simple stuff. He just does
Really?
like cooking an omelet or like a lasagna or like not crazy, outlandish, highbrow French cuisine or anything like that. It's just about simple things. And this is how you crack the egg. This is how you put the toast in the toaster. And he just loves the absolute, almost mundane basics of doing it right. But there's a joy in being able to
Yeah.
just do that right and then enjoy the fullness of the product at the end of it. And it speaks to something you said as well about your experience in, eventually being able to do that, achieve that goal when you're a bit older. Experience helps. And a little bit of the wisdom in the age, I think, also helps. I could certainly,
Yes.
from when I used to set goals maybe 10 years ago, I'm a lot better at setting them now because I know myself and I know what's going to
Yes.
keep me motivated, what's going to kind of keep my eye in the game, how am I going to maybe self-sabotage, and not end up doing it, so you got to kind of put your own breadcrumbs out there. And I think you get better at doing that the more you do it.
Certainly you do. And I would assume for you, having seen a little bit of your world and what you do, is, being exposed also to the right things, or turning yourself so that you're the exposure, you deliberately expose yourself to what that thinking means. And I find often, even when people who come from adverse circumstances, there were certain exposures that they chose to let into their lives. But you're absolutely right. Experience, being a little bit older. I also think sometimes when sometimes people think they have experience, but it's the same year that they just did 30 times over. And then they'll want to call that 30 years of experience. And I'm thinking, geez, buddy, you just had the same year over and over. But when you have a growth mindset, which I think, I would stick my neck out and say, well, that's, I think, what you've got because of the material you choose to have around you, and that. Then age becomes excessively valuable. And in fact, I find a lot of times with elderly people, when I do see them, is one of their biggest fears is irrelevance, being dumped in the corner. And it's so sad when that does in fact happen, because they're not irrelevant. They have this amazing, experience to contribute from, but it's a fear. And we stay relevant when we expose ourselves deliberately to constructive mindsets, and to where we still get challenged in different ways. But you're absolutely right about the experience thing. It really helps. And some people get a lifetime of experience at 30. Those people are quite impressive, in their own right. But there's a real value to being a little bit older. And I think part of that is that you see process. You've seen process, and you understand sometimes the value of things, and you also learn that certain things are not valuable that perhaps younger people, hitch onto.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, who's with us, is a big proponent on the growth mindset. Sarah, I wonder if you've got
Wow.
anything you want to jump in with, or any thoughts so far on our conversation?
I'm feeling quite emotional, David, because you are sort of bringing together like multiple of my passions, high performance
Oh,
sport, growth mindset. And so I just wanted to thank you. This has been a really very energizing hour for me. Alex,
thank
as
you.
always, thank you so much. I think so yeah, in short, David, I'm building so growth mindset. I've got a framework around it, and we coach people to kind of take it from the conceptual to actually do something about it. So it could be
Wow.
confirmation bias, but a number of things that you said, I'm like, oh, good. He thinks that. And we've got some of those elements in there, which is nice. I thought your point around the exposure of sorts, from the outside in, was a really sense. Even if that exposure comes from asking yourself better questions, it's a sort of an extrinsic thing that has to happen. You read something, you need something to change externally. I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit more to your endurance side of things. My daughter's an elite athlete, and I've just done
Wow.
a certificate in psychology from Barcelona FC, actually, the football club, on mental coaching, and that's
Cool.
been super cool. When you are in the can you talk a little bit about your preparation, mindset wise, for a really tough endurance race? So the preparation, and then you must be reaching points in the race where your lactic's like off the charts. You're feeling like, what the hell have I done? Talk to me some more about the mental process that you go through that makes you
Great
finish
question.
those races.
You know, when you ask that question, it kind of reminds me. So there's another race in South Africa called the Two Oceans Ultra Marathon. It's a 56-kilometer run around Cape Town, and it's also been going for many years. And there are thousands and thousands of people who run this thing. And I'd been I kind of always struggled with that race. I won't bore you with the details, but there's like this very long hill after the 42-kilometer mark. And every year I've done this race, I've done it about 5 times now, I think 4 or 5 times. I blow up on that hill because just like you said, so you've done a whole marathon and then there's this 8-kilometer hill that you got to go up, and then you got to come down it again, and then you're braking, right? Because it's now you don't know what you want, an uphill or a downhill, and they print your name on your bib. So even people who don't know you, Cape Town comes out to watch this thing. It's a tradition there. And so people will say, "Hey, David, you're looking good." And I feel like saying, "Get lost."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Leave me alone.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Yeah, walk a mile in my shoes. And so I was battled. So I did the race again last year, and there was a gentleman. His name he's now late. He's just passed away early this year. His name is Dana, and Dana is a gentleman who I always used to say was basically the Jerry Maguire of running in South Africa. Running in South Africa is huge, and he ran this professional team, which he let me be a part of because they invited my wife and they said, "Oh, we'll take your fat, slow husband." Compared to the other people in the team, I was, because I wasn't a
your
professional.
wife, next guest, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely, that'd be worth doing. And so they let me run this race. And this guy, so it was me wearing the same uniform as all these pro athletes, and they all weigh half of what you do. And this man treated me from day one like I was a pro. And so last year, so he then contracted cancer, and at the time of the last two oceans last year, which was kind of around Easter of 2023, he was really like starting to lose the weight, and he was really battling this thing. So in my mind, your question's around mindset going in. So I know the two oceans route. I know it's called Constantia Hill, this hill that you kind of hit after the 42K mark, and I know what it feels like, and I know the devastation. And when you're going up that hill, it's like, I'm sure what soldiers looked like when they were walking back from the Somme. They're people in all sorts of states of disrepair and despair, and just kind of wanting that from now on they're playing chess. They're not ever going to run again. That kind of a feeling, and the sun bakes down on you. So before the race, one of the things I'd been seeing one of our national cricketers actually just briefly for some other thing, and it really brought to mind, like I said, no, sports unnecessary. I don't need to run 56 kilometers. I could drive it. I was never going to win any money for that race. So in sport and endurance, we play sport. And that was something that I spoke with this gentleman about. As I said, you play cricket. You don't work cricket, because he was starting to work cricket. And so he started to not enjoy the sport the way that he did, because it was all contracts and performance agreements and almost agreements and things. So I needed a reason to run. And that day last year in April of 2023, I said to myself, I'm running this for Dana. And I'd sent him a message. And I said, you know what, I'm running this. You're running a race that you can't get out of. I'm not going to let myself get out of this race. I will not walk. I will not walk in this marathon. And so I needed to, every time when you're running a marathon, right, or anything, I mean, what your daughter does, somebody training for rugby, and they're having to, go through these very grueling gym sessions. When you're running a marathon, your mind kind of goes, okay, I'm in pain. The lactic acid's all over. I'm in agony. And I thought to myself, sometimes you decide, okay, I'm going to walk from this tree to that tree. Mm-hmm. But then I'd go, well, why that tree? Why not the tree after that tree? And going up Constantia, I just thought to myself, cancer kills people. The two oceans doesn't. Mm-hmm. So I'm not
except for the kidney failure incident earlier. But
yes. So runners have a terrible memory for that. Well, it didn't kill me, and you've got to.
Yeah. So, sorry, I just, but serious topic. Mm.
And so I just decided that I was intent on not walking the whole of two oceans, because every year I've done it, I did a section where I walked. And I thought, I'm not going to run it. And I'm looking forward to getting to the end and telling Dana that, you know what, I didn't walk 1 meter. And I did it for you. And I thought of you, suffering from cancer, which ultimately took his life.
Mm.
And I did that. And I was absolutely knackered towards, at the end, I crossed the finish line in pieces. I ran my fastest ever to Oceans, and I'd run it in my 20s, I'd run it in my 30s. And there I was past my mid 40s. I'll be 50 in a year and a half. And I was able to run it faster than I did in my 20s, my 30s. And it's not for any other reason I needed a reason.
Yeah.
So you need a reason that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you need to stick a stake in the ground. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And you develop a kind of a hard knuckle, irrational, because I didn't have to finish that marathon in any significant time
Right.
at all. But I just thought, you know what, that was important to me to appreciate, to express to Dana, this guy, my appreciation for him treating me like I was one of the team.
Yes.
And I was the fat slow guy at the back. And I wanted to give that back to him because there was nothing else to do for him. I wasn't, there was nothing else I could do for him other than that. And so, yeah, when the lactic acid's burning you up, what I learned during that marathon is that even if you're in agony, you can still run in agony. And walking is also painful. So you might as well run.
Right.
Just get to the end quicker. And that was a thing for me. So I think very often people embark on things because they're a good idea, because they're conventionally, this is what you do. But when you have a real reason, an absolute reason to do that, it really matters. I've referenced my dad. My dad comes from this crappy little village on this little island, and it's the same little village that Cristiano Ronaldo was born in.
Oh, in Mallorca.
Madeira,
sorry. Yeah.
Madeira, and it's Sant Antonio. It's this little section of just outside the capital. And sadly, we don't know each other. The families don't know each other because when my dad left the island, his dad was 4. I have a picture of my mom and his mother having their nails done together in Madeira.
Wow.
No way.
Because my mom bumped into in a nail bar. They were there on holiday, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know Cristiano Ronaldo, but I read up on him as much as I can because, and there are many football purists who might want to have my throat for this, but I don't think he's the most talented football player around. I think Lionel Messi is probably more talented than him and has more flair. But he has an absolute dogged determination. He has a brother. He's got older sisters. He's the youngest, I think, of 3 or 4 kids. So he's got 2 older sisters and an older brother. None of them were particularly talented. His dad had an alcohol problem. He speaks about it. His mom, there was no evidence of, this kid's going somewhere. Absolutely. Look at the lineage. There's no lineage. There's nothing. Really believe that what sets him apart is that same thing, is he's absolutely clear on move everything out the way. This is what I'm going to do. And that's why he and a couple of other footballers are really breaking the mold in terms of how long a striker can be an effective.
Yeah, right.
He's retired at 32. He's 39. And he's not as quick as maybe he used to be, but he's not genetically, we've seen the genetics, he's not genetically amazing at all. It's not like he had this amazing background. This was just pure, like, that's it. What does it take? If I really want it badly, that's what I'm going to do. So maybe his only talent is that he found his reason and was able to hold on to it very tightly. But I think many people, many people, if your reason is clear and it aligns with what your talents are, if you're not sure what you want to do with your life, look at what talents you've been given and start there. I had to go through that quite late in my career. And when you have that clarity, like a businessman that I know from Australia often says, clarity brings a sense of urgency. And when you're unclear, you don't work with urgency.
Yeah.
What I love about Cristiano Ronaldo, he's urgent. He's a pain in the butt, actually, because he's always whinging. He's always like he's just devastated that he doesn't score
because he
three
wants
goals
that
in the
next
match.
goal or next. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think his process is really strong as well. I saw a post
Yes.
the other day on his penalty taking process and the self-talk and the step-by-step. And
yeah,
as an England supporter, I've studied penalty taking or the lack thereof. Um, but yeah, no, I think what's super interesting about this conversation is that, fixed versus growth mindset, we tend to think it needs to be an intrinsic motivation in order for it to last. And you've sort of said that. And yet it's not as simple as that. There's this sort of combination of extrinsic and intrinsic, sometimes the
yeah,
extrinsic, the thing I really like, the walking down the aisle of an aeroplane, we've all done it, right? And
yeah.
yeah, there's this sort of emotional connectivity to the goals there that you've described, which I think is quite an
Yeah.
interesting aspect. Is can you connect emotionally to either something really positive or, in that case, something really negative?
I love when I'm setting goals with someone and they cry.
Mm,
We've hit the oil vein right there.
yeah, yeah.
So when I'm setting goals and people, if they don't cry, I just keep asking for more. It's like peeling the layers of an onion off.
Hmm.
And when they sort of choke up, man, then my pen's ready and I hold them to it. And my
Yeah,
goal with
yeah.
them is, I've written it on this paper, and you and I are going to work together until I can cross it off this paper,
Hmm.
until it's done. And in particularly in the world of weight loss, I did that a lot. Literally with more than 1,000 people, was find a goal that's emotional, because your doctor will give you a goal, right? Well, at your height, you should weigh so
Right.
many pounds or kilograms. I'm not interested. I don't want to know about your goal weight. I want to know, what does weighing that mean in your life?
Mm.
And when they choke up, when I can see moisture at the bottom of the eye, then I know we're moving in the right direction.
There's something interesting you said around the fact that you're setting goals with them.
Mm.
I think that sounds like such a smart strategy, actually, and maybe something that isn't as intuitive as it should be, with this idea of setting a goal. I want to change something. I want to make my life better in some way, but not being accountable to anyone else but yourself. It's like setting a goal without a deadline or without a number or without any detail. But this idea of doing it with someone, or them hearing you, the commitment you're making, because that's ultimately what it is, right? It's a commitment. I'm going to follow through. I'm going to push through. I'm not going to walk. I'm going to run, and I'm going to get to the finish line. Requires a sort of a fortitude and a Cristiano Ronaldo kind of determination and a work ethic, but it also requires someone to sort of go, how are you doing on that goal? Are you going to make it? Because you're accountable to me now as well, not just yourself.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, Alex. Totally. Cristiano Ronaldo's stories, he always has a thing about looking after his mother. Now, I'm not sure how many yachts he thinks she needs, but that was a big part of what he saw her suffer, the downside of his father's addictions. And so he really wanted to create this life, and he wanted to look after his family, his brothers, and now he's got, his own family. And it was kind of the same with me running 2 Oceans last year. When I really was thinking, well, no one will care. I'm still finishing in front of 90% of the field in terms of my time. No one will care if I walk a little bit of the section of this hill. Nobody's going to care. But I had accountability towards Dana, which is probably not a good way to illustrate the point. But in my mind, I thought, I can't wait to tell him that I've never not walked this hill except for this year when I'm at this is the oldest I've ever been doing this race. And I've never not walked this hill. And the first time I've ever not walked it, I did it because I wanted you to know that I know you're walking up a hill. And that's the message I wrote. I actually put it on social media even
Mm.
for him to see, is accountability is a huge part of it. There are very few people who can like hunker down. Okay, what are my goals? Write them down and shoot for the stars. There's always a bit of a communality. There's a communion in goals. Like some comedian said, even Jesus needed 12 guys to help him get it over the line. Like
I like
there's
that.
something in the human experience is having that not only accountability but community, but certainly it is setting goals with. You're absolutely right. The power is that. Sometimes with people living with obesity, by the way, we would write a goal down and they'd say, well, that's always been my goal. So they don't discover them always with me. But often with me, it's the first time they've ever said it. I want to be able to tuck my shirt into my pants. I want to be able to buy clothing in a normal store. I want to be able to play with my kids on the floor and get up. I want to be able to walk on the beach because my ankles, blah, blah, blah. They know these things. But as soon as you air that in the presence of another, and if that person who you're airing it in front of takes you seriously, they value you, they value your goals, they value what's important to you, there's a certain power there. It's like taking it from myth to possibility.
Beautiful. I have one more thing to sort of ask or kind of get your thoughts on is, and maybe this is also a myth, but is balance possible? What do you think about the idea of balance? Is balance something that's just, a fun way to think about what we should always be striving for but never get to? Or is it something that can be a realistic proposition but just has to be tweaked in your own way?
When you go to the circus or one of these like Cirque du Soleil, and you see people standing on, when they have like a board and then a ball and then a board and then a ball and then here's another board, and the person actually stands on top of that. That's amazing balance. I mean, it's beyond supernatural. I don't know how people even conceptualize that stuff. And when you watch those people, they're never standing still. There's always this sort of wobble. And as they're wobbling, we're just applauding. Like, that's amazing. How does he balance on a ball, on a ball, on a board, or whatever? And I think when people think of balance, they think of it as static. So I spend, 8 hours at work, and I spend 8 hours sleeping, and I spend 8 hours with my family. I'm not sure that's balance. In my opinion, balance sometimes requires adjustment. So if you, for example, are wanting to build a huge business and you really want that business to grow, 8 hours is not going to be enough. You're going to have to put in more. You're going to have to ask for a little bit of time from your sleep schedule. You're going to have to ask for a little bit of time from your family and go, this is what I'm going, but this is why I'm doing this. This is why you won't see me tonight. I mean, I know some people who work through the night. I know a financial guy, a massively successful gentleman in the financial industry, and he says, there were nights when he was a younger man where he worked through the night because there was a deadline, and that's not balanced. That's completely unbalanced. But he was unbalanced for a period with a goal. So he kind of was wonky, and today, man, he's like this. He's elderly. He's 81, and I mean, he's financially sorted. He travels the world and has a wonderful life and supports his family. So balance is real. I really do believe that it's always something that we should be thinking about. But balance, in my opinion, is not the static, wonderful, beautiful thing. You have to sometimes, the guy who gets onto the board on the ball, on the board, on the ball, at the beginning, it looks like he's going to fall off. And I bet when he started doing that, he fell off a bunch of times. That's completely unbalanced. But he knew where he was going. He knew he was going to get to the point where he could stay on top of that board for as long as he wanted to do. So he had a clear goal, and he was willing to get unbalanced for a while until he found his balance. So then you can get to, 8 hours work, 8 hours family, 8 hours sleep. But we have to be willing to, at some point, put in a lot to the thing we really want to work, to ultimately reach that point where it is impressive to be standing and balancing on top of all of those things. So I just find, and forgive me, this is kind of going off on my own tangent here, but one of the reasons that some people don't want to stick their neck out and put out a great goal, and they'll use balance as an excuse. I want to be balanced and all that kind of stuff. Of course you do, because there are also the opposite side of the story is people who spend their whole lives trying to amass wealth and their kids grew up without them. That's terrible. That's unbalanced, in my opinion. So we have to be thinking about all these different facets. And at times, at crucial times, we may be out of balance, but we know we're out of balance and we know that our goal is to get to the point where we're on top of that thing and we get to everything. But balance is elusive. Balance is dynamic, and balance has to be conscious. But balance is not, dividing your day up in these 3 strict lines and never faltering from that, because also from never ever being even a little bit unbalanced or never willing to take the odd fall, you actually never shoot for the stars.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think all of us have had big careers and, juggling parenthood with, work and so on. For me, I kind of threw that out when I was, 3 kids juggling, big job and whatever. For me, I also, and I think I've seen you write on this too, Alex, this energy inflows versus energy outflows. So a lot of people, I think, say, I want more work-life balance because they freaking hate their work, like they hate it. And so the energy outflows that time at work takes feels like they're out of balance, even though, they might be doing quite a perfect job of hitting the balance in terms of time allocated. But for me, yeah, do you look at your week and go, or do you look at your week and say, oh, Wednesday's going to be a great day, Tuesday's going to be a great day, Thursday not so much, but look at Friday, and then just looking at where you're spending your time, I think is something that I found helpful over the years.
Yeah, I love that. I love this idea of beautifully answered as well, David, because you're right that balance requires motion and persistence and vision.
Yes.
In order to be balanced, in order to be balanced, and it also requires you to be kind of in the kind of consistent act of balancing, which is okay, this week's got to be a bit like that,
right?
All right, now we got to be a bit like that this time, but because there's a larger story, there's a larger general motion at play, which is yes, okay, I want to retire when I'm 50, I want to be a good father. I want to start that business, whatever it might be, then all of the moments of unbalance make sense. They're not just completely unbalanced. Yeah. So there's a sort of a reason behind that. Yeah. Great way to think about it. Well, David, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think we ended up going in a number of really, really cool areas, which I didn't anticipate. And I thought I found myself sort of learning and kind of taking in things, and I even made some notes. I love that quote about the tumbleweed. Tumbleweeds land up in the ditch. That's poetry right there. I like that.
All mine.
Very good. I'll make sure I tag you. But thanks again. Thanks for sharing your wonderful humble mind with us, and I hope you'll come back again soon. And
anytime you like, Alex. I really appreciated you from the day we met online, and I love what you're doing. So thank you. I really, really want to thank you for having me. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Mind. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious to take a look at our community, if you're not a member, you're missing out. Make sure you head to humblemind.co to check out more and to see what we're up to. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.